I never thought I'd be the one holding the keys to our childhood home. But here I am, standing in the empty living room where we used to play hide and seek, where Mom taught us to bake cookies, where Dad read us bedtime stories. The irony isn't lost on me. They all said I wouldn't even show up to the auction. Well, I didn't just show up. I bought the entire house, and none of them were invited to celebrate with me. But let me tell you how we got here, because this story is about more than just a house. It's about family, respect, and what happens when the quiet one finally finds her voice. My name is Rachel, and I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. Growing up, I was always the afterthought, the one who got hand-me-downs, the one whose opinions didn't really matter in family discussions. My older brothers, Michael, David, and my sister Jennifer, were the golden children, successful, outspoken, always taking center stage. I learned early on to stay quiet, to observe, to make myself small. It became my survival mechanism, but it also became my greatest weapon, though I wouldn't realize that for years. Our parents, Robert and Linda, had built their dream home in 1982, a beautiful colonial-style house with 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a backyard that seemed endless to us kids. Dad was a construction foreman, Mom was a school secretary, and they poured every penny they had into making that house perfect for their family. It wasn't just a house. It was the foundation of everything we were supposed to be. But families aren't always what they seem from the outside, and ours had cracks that ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. Michael, the eldest at 45, was a real estate developer who'd made a fortune flipping houses but had never learned the value of anything that couldn't be sold. David, 2 years younger, was a corporate lawyer who treated every conversation like a negotiation he had to win. Jennifer, just 18 months older than me, was a marketing executive who'd perfected the art of making everything about herself. And then there was me, Rachel, 38 years old, unmarried, working as a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm. To my family, I was the cautious one, the boring one, the one who never took risks. What they didn't know was that being cautious had made me very good with money, and being overlooked had taught me to pay attention to details they missed. When Dad had his first heart attack 3 years ago, everything changed. Mom couldn't handle the stress of caring for him alone, and the medical bills started piling up. Dad had good insurance, but not good enough, and the house payments became harder to manage. I was the only one who offered to help financially, sending them $1,000 every month without being asked, covering their groceries when I visited, paying for Dad's medications when insurance fell short. Michael was too busy with his latest development project to notice their struggle. David said they should downsize anyway, that the house was too big for 2 aging people. Jennifer suggested they get a reverse mortgage, which would have been financial suicide at their age. But I quietly kept sending money, kept showing up every Sunday for dinner, kept being the daughter who was present even when I wasn't appreciated. Dad passed away last winter. It was sudden. Another heart attack. This one, fatal. Mom was devastated, and the family gathered for the funeral with the usual drama. Michael arrived in his Mercedes, complaining about having to leave an important meeting. David brought his new girlfriend, who spent the whole time on her phone. Jennifer made the funeral about her grief, sobbing loudly during the service while Mom sat stoically beside me. After the burial, we all gathered at the house for the traditional meal. It should have been a time for remembering Dad, for supporting Mom, for coming together as a family. Instead, it became the beginning of the end. "Mom, we need to talk about practical things," Michael announced, while we were still eating the casseroles neighbors had brought. "This house is too much for you now. You should sell it and move into one of those nice senior communities." "The market is hot right now," David added, already switching into lawyer mode. "You could get top dollar if we list it soon." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. "And think how much easier your life would be without all this maintenance. No more yard work, no more repairs." I watched Mom's face crumble. This house wasn't just property to her. It was 40 years of memories, the place where she'd raised her children, where she'd loved my father. But my siblings were already making plans, talking over her soft protests. "I don't want to sell," Mom whispered, but they weren't listening. "Mom, Be practical, Michael said dismissively. What are you going to do, rattle around in this big house by yourself? I could help, I offered quietly. I could move in, help with expenses, keep you company. The silence that followed was deafening. Then David laughed. Actually laughed. Rachel, you can't afford to maintain this place any more than Mom can. You rent that tiny apartment downtown, for God's sake. Besides, Jennifer added with that condescending smile she'd perfected, you don't know anything about home ownership. This isn't like balancing a checkbook. That stung, especially since I'd been helping with their finances for 3 years without any of them knowing. But I stayed quiet, as usual, and watched them steamroll over Mom's wishes with their grand plans. Over the next few months, they kept pressuring Mom. Michael would call with listings of senior communities. David sent her pamphlets about estate planning and the benefits of liquefying assets. Jennifer dropped by with real estate magazines, pointing out how much money comparable houses in the neighborhood were selling for. Mom grew more depressed with each visit. She'd call me crying, saying she felt like she was betraying Dad's memory, that she didn't know what to do. I kept telling her she didn't have to sell, that there were other options, but she was being worn down by the constant pressure. They're probably right, she'd say sadly. I'm just being sentimental. It's just a house. But it wasn't just a house, and I knew it. I also knew something my siblings didn't. Mom's financial situation wasn't as dire as they thought. Yes, there was debt from Dad's medical bills, but the house was almost paid off, and she had more in savings than she'd let on. She was being careful, scared of running out of money, but she wasn't destitute. I started doing my own research. I looked into reverse mortgages, home equity lines of credit, and other options that would let Mom keep the house. I researched the actual costs of maintenance and utilities, compared them to the costs of senior living facilities. What I found was that staying in the house would actually be less expensive than most of the places my siblings were suggesting. But when I tried to present this information at our next family gathering, I was shut down before I could even start. Rachel, we appreciate your input, Michael said in that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. But this is a complex financial decision that requires real expertise. I have expertise, I said quietly. I'm a financial analyst. This is literally what I do for a living. David waved his hand dismissively. You analyze other people's investments, not real estate decisions. This is different. Jennifer rolled her eyes. Besides, you're too emotionally involved. You can't see the situation clearly. I felt that familiar burn of frustration, the feeling of being dismissed and diminished that had followed me since childhood. But something was different this time. Maybe it was grief, or maybe I was just tired of being invisible, but I found myself speaking up. I think Mom should make her own decision, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. It's her house, her life. We should support whatever she chooses. The room went quiet. Mom looked at me with surprise. She wasn't used to hearing me assert myself either. Of course it's her decision, Michael said carefully, but she's asked for our advice, and we're giving it. The responsible thing is to sell. The responsible thing, I replied, feeling bolder, is to present her with all the options and let her choose. Not pressure her into a decision that benefits our peace of mind more than her happiness. That's when things got ugly. What's that supposed to mean? Jennifer snapped. It means you want her to sell because it's easier for you, I said, surprised by my own directness. You won't have to worry about her living alone, won't have to help with maintenance, won't have to feel guilty about not visiting enough. You can put her in a facility and check her off your list. David's face turned red. That's completely unfair, Rachel. We're thinking about what's best for Mom. Are you? I challenged. Because what's best for Mom is staying in the house she loves, surrounded by her memories, in the neighborhood where she has friends. What's best for you is having her somewhere safe, so you don't have to think about her. Michael stood up abruptly. You know what your problem is, Rachel? You've never had to make hard decisions. You've never owned property, never been responsible for anyone but yourself. You live in this fantasy world where everything can stay the same forever, but that's not how life works. And your problem, I shot back, standing up too, is that you think having money makes you wise. You think being successful in business means you know what's best for everyone. But you don't know Mom at all. You don't know what makes her happy, what she needs, what she wants. Enough, Mom said quietly, but her voice cut through our argument. Please, just enough. We all turned to look at her. She looked so small, so tired, sitting in Dad's old recliner with tears in her eyes. I can't handle this fighting, she whispered. Your father would be so disappointed. We're supposed to be family. The guilt hit all of us, but it didn't change anything. If anything, it made things worse. Now my siblings weren't just dismissive. They were angry. They blamed me for upsetting Mom, for causing conflict, for being stubborn and unrealistic. Over the next few weeks, they intensified their campaign. They had Mom visit 3 different senior communities, brought real estate agents to the house for assessments, even started packing up some of Dad's things to help her get started. They were so confident in their plan, so sure they knew what was best. What they didn't know was that I was making plans of my own. I'd been thinking about something Michael had said, about me never taking risks, never making hard decisions. He was right, in a way. I'd spent my whole life playing it safe, being the good daughter, the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble. But watching them bulldoze over Mom's wishes, seeing her spirit being crushed a little more each day, I realized that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. I started by having a private conversation with Mom. I went over on a Tuesday evening, brought takeout from her favorite Chinese restaurant, and we sat at the kitchen table where we'd had so many conversations over the years. Mom, I said carefully, what do you really want to do about the house? She was quiet for a long moment, picking at her lo mein with chopsticks Dad had brought back from a business trip 20 years ago. I want to stay, she said finally. I know it's not practical. I know your siblings think I'm being foolish, but I want to stay. This is where your father is, where you kids grew up. I'm not ready to let go. Then don't, I said simply. She looked at me with those tired eyes. It's not that easy, sweetheart. The bills, the maintenance, being alone. What if you weren't alone? I asked. What if I moved in? We could share expenses. I could help with repairs and yard work. You'd have company, and I'd have a real home instead of that cramped apartment. Her face lit up for the first time in months. You'd really do that? Move back home? I'd love to, I said, and realized I meant it. I've missed this place. I've missed having family dinners, missed the garden, missed feeling like I belonged somewhere. We talked for hours that night, working out the practical details. I would pay rent equivalent to my apartment lease, plus half the utilities. I'd take over the yard work and minor repairs. We'd share grocery costs and household chores. It wasn't just financially viable, it was actually a better situation for both of us. But I knew my siblings would never accept it. They'd find new reasons why it wouldn't work, new problems with the plan. So I decided not to tell them, not yet. Instead, I started making quiet preparations. I gave notice on my apartment, arranged to have my things moved gradually over several weekends. I researched home maintenance companies, updated Mom's insurance policies, and set up a system for managing the household finances. Mom was like a new person. She started cooking again, tending her garden, calling old friends she'd been too depressed to talk to. The change in her was remarkable, and it broke my heart to think my siblings couldn't see how much this house meant to her. 3 weeks before my lease was up, I finally told my family about the plan. I invited them all over for Sunday dinner, just like old times, and broke the news over Mom's pot roast. Rachel's moving in with me, Mom announced proudly, smiling wider than I'd seen her smile since Dad's funeral. We're going to share expenses and keep the house. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Are you kidding me? Michael slammed his fork down. Mom, this is exactly what we were trying to avoid. You can't become dependent on Rachel. Why not? Mom asked, her smile fading. She's my daughter. Because Rachel's never owned property, David said sharply. She doesn't understand what she's getting into. What happens when the roof needs replacing? When the furnace dies? when you need expensive medical care. We'll handle it together, I said calmly, just like any family would. Jennifer laughed bitterly. Rachel, you make $40,000 a year. Do you have any idea what this house costs to maintain? Actually, I made $68,000 a year, plus bonuses, but I'd never corrected their assumptions about my salary. It was another example of how little they actually knew about my life. I know exactly what it costs, I said. I've been helping with expenses for 3 years. That stopped them cold. What do you mean? Michael asked slowly. I mean, I've been sending Mom $1,000 every month since Dad's first heart attack. I've been paying for groceries, medications, repairs. I probably know the household budget better than anyone. The silence was deafening. Mom looked embarrassed. My siblings looked shocked. Why didn't you tell us? David demanded. Because you never asked, I said simply. You assumed I couldn't help, so you never bothered to find out if I was already helping. That's... Jennifer started, then stopped, clearly struggling with this new information. That changes things, Michael said finally. If you've been supporting Mom financially, then maybe you have more invested in this decision than we realized. I thought maybe, finally, they were starting to understand, but I was wrong. Which is exactly why you can't be objective about this, David continued. You've thrown good money after bad for 3 years. Now you want to throw away even more by moving into a house that's a financial sinkhole. It's not a sinkhole, I said, my patience wearing thin. It's a home. It's a money pit, Michael corrected. Rachel, I admire your loyalty, but you're being naive. This house is 40 years old. The roof is original, the furnace is ancient, the electrical system probably isn't up to code. You could spend your entire savings just keeping it functional. And what if something happens to you? Jennifer added. What if you lose your job or get sick? Then Mom's worse off than before. They had an answer for everything, a reason why every solution wouldn't work. They were so convinced they were right, so sure I was making a mistake, that they couldn't see the obvious truth. Their plan was about their comfort, not Mom's. That's when Mom surprised all of us. Stop, she said firmly, standing up from the table. All of you, just stop. We turned to look at her, startled by the strength in her voice. I am 68 years old, she continued, her voice getting stronger. I raised 4 children. I've been married for 45 years. I've survived cancer and my husband's death. I am not a child who needs you to make decisions for me. Mom, we're not, Michael started. Yes, you are, she interrupted. You've been treating me like I'm incompetent, like I can't manage my own life. Well, I can. And I've decided I want to stay in my house with Rachel. If you can't support that decision, then you don't have to visit. The room erupted. Michael accused me of manipulating Mom, of taking advantage of her grief. David threatened to have her declared incompetent if she insisted on making irrational financial decisions. Jennifer cried and said we were tearing the family apart. But Mom stood firm. For the first time in months, she looked like herself again. Strong, determined, not willing to be pushed around. This is my house, she said quietly when they finally stopped shouting. Your father and I built this life together, and I'm not ready to give it up. Rachel understands that. I wish you did too. One by one, they left. Michael stormed out first, muttering about stubborn women and financial disasters. David left legal documents about elder care and durable power of attorney, warning Mom that she'd need them when I inevitably failed her. Jennifer left in tears, saying she couldn't watch Mom make such a terrible mistake. I stayed to help clean up and found Mom crying quietly in the kitchen. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to choose between my children. You didn't choose, I said, putting my arms around her. You chose yourself, your own happiness. That's not the same thing. I moved in the following weekend. My siblings had been right about one thing. Moving is expensive and complicated. But they'd been wrong about my ability to handle it. I'd been planning this for weeks, had everything organized, had help lined up. I'd also been wrong about something. I'd underestimated how good it would feel to come home to a place where I was wanted. For 6 months, Everything was perfect. Mom and I fell into an easy routine. I'd work from home 2 days a week, and we'd have lunch together, work in the garden, watch old movies in the evening. She taught me her recipes. I helped her learn to use a tablet to video call with her sister in Florida. We were both happier than we'd been in years. My siblings, meanwhile, made their disapproval clear. They rarely visited, and when they did, they'd walk through the house looking for problems, pointing out every small repair that needed to be made, every sign of wear that proved their point about the house being too much for us. "That stain on the ceiling is getting bigger," Michael would say. "You've got a roof leak that's going to cost thousands to fix." "The garage door is making a grinding noise," David would add. "The motor's probably shot. That's another expensive repair." Jennifer would just shake her head sadly, as if watching a slow-motion disaster she was powerless to prevent. But we were managing fine. I'd budgeted for repairs and maintenance, had reliable contractors, kept everything in good working order. The house was no more expensive than they'd predicted. It was actually less expensive than some of the senior communities they'd wanted Mom to consider. Still, they kept predicting doom. They were so invested in being right about the house being a mistake that they seemed almost disappointed when things went well. Then, last spring, everything changed. Mom had been having some health issues. Nothing serious, just the usual aches and pains of aging. But her doctor wanted some tests done. I took time off work to drive her to appointments, stayed with her during procedures, managed her medications. It was exactly the kind of situation my siblings had warned about, the kind of responsibility they said I couldn't handle. But I handled it just fine. Better than fine, actually. Because I was there, living in the house, I noticed when Mom was having a bad day before anyone else would have. I could adjust our routine, make sure she was eating well, keep track of her symptoms. The doctors were impressed with how well managed her care was. My siblings, meanwhile, barely visited during this time. Michael sent flowers to the hospital. David called once a week to check in. Jennifer stopped by after Mom was feeling better, bringing a get-well card and staying for 20 minutes. It was during one of these visits that Mom made an announcement that changed everything. "I've been thinking," she said, as we sat in the living room with Jennifer, "about what happens to the house when I'm gone." Jennifer immediately perked up. This was the conversation they'd all been waiting for, the practical discussion about inheritance and estate planning. "I want Rachel to have it," Mom continued. "She's the one who's been taking care of it, taking care of me. It seems only fair." Jennifer's face went white. "Mom, you can't be serious. The house should be divided equally among all of us." "That's what Dad would have wanted. Your father would have wanted the house to go to whoever would love it and care for it," Mom replied firmly. "That's Rachel." "But that's not fair to the rest of us," Jennifer protested. "We're your children too." "And you've made it very clear that you see this house as a burden," Mom said sadly. "You've spent 2 years trying to convince me to sell it. Why would I leave it to people who don't want it?" Jennifer left that day angry and hurt, and within hours, my phone was ringing. First Michael, then David, both furious about Mom's unfair decision. They accused me of manipulating her, of isolating her from the rest of the family, of taking advantage of her gratitude. "You planned this from the beginning," Michael accused. "You moved in there to make sure you'd inherit everything." "I moved in because Mom needed help, and you wouldn't provide it," I shot back. "I never asked her to leave me the house." "Right," David said sarcastically when he called an hour later. "You just happened to become the perfect daughter right when inheritance decisions were being made." "I became the daughter who was present," I corrected. "There's a difference." But they didn't see it that way. To them, I was the manipulative younger sister who'd somehow stolen their inheritance through trickery and emotional manipulation. They couldn't accept that maybe, just maybe, being there for someone when they need you matters more than having the right job title or making the most money. The family tension reached a breaking point at Thanksgiving. We'd planned to host dinner at the house, like we used to when Dad was alive. I'd been cooking for 2 days, Mom had been cleaning and decorating, and we were both excited to have everyone together again. They came, but the atmosphere was poisonous. Every conversation turned into a subtle dig about the house, about inheritance, about fairness. Michael made pointed comments about how convenient it was that I'd become so helpful right around the time Mom was making estate planning decisions. David kept bringing up the legal complexities of property transfer and tax implications. Jennifer alternated between icy silence and passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty. Mom tried to keep things peaceful, but I could see how much their behavior was hurting her. This was supposed to be a celebration, a family gathering, but instead it felt like a trial where I was being judged for crimes I hadn't committed. The breaking point came during dessert when Michael casually mentioned that he'd been talking to a lawyer about elder abuse and undue influence. "Just want to make sure Mom is making decisions with a clear head," he said, cutting into his pie like he hadn't just threatened to have me investigated. That's when Mom lost it. "Get out," she said quietly. "What?" Michael looked up, startled. "I said, get out," Mom repeated, her voice getting stronger. "All of you. Rachel, you stay. The rest of you, leave my house." "Mom, you're overreacting," Jennifer started. "Am I?" Mom stood up, her hands shaking with anger. "My son just accused my daughter of elder abuse at my Thanksgiving table, in my house. How exactly should I react to that?" "We're just concerned," David began. "You're concerned about money," Mom interrupted. "You're concerned about inheritance. You're not concerned about me, or you'd see how happy I've been this past year. You'd see how well Rachel takes care of me, how much better my life is with her here." "Mom, please." Michael tried a different approach. "We're family. We should be able to discuss these things." "Family," Mom repeated bitterly. "Where was my family when I was crying myself to sleep after your father died? Where was my family when I couldn't afford his medications? Where was my family when I needed help with doctor's appointments and grocery shopping?" She turned to look at each of them. "I'll tell you where you were. Michael, you were busy with your business deals. David, you were busy with your new girlfriend. Jennifer, you were busy with your career. The only one who was here, who helped, who cared, was Rachel." "That's not fair," Jennifer protested. "We all had our own lives, our own responsibilities." "Exactly," Mom said. "You had your own lives. Rachel made me part of hers." They left that night angry and hurt, but not before making it clear that this wasn't over. Michael mentioned lawyers again. David talked about challenging any will that wasn't equitable. Jennifer cried and said I'd turned Mom against her own children. After they left, Mom and I sat in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our ruined holiday. "I'm sorry," I said. "I never wanted to cause problems between you and them." "You didn't cause anything," Mom replied firmly. "They did this to themselves. I just finally found the courage to call them on it. But I could see how much the confrontation had cost her. She looked older, more fragile than she had in months. The stress of fighting with her other children was wearing on her, even though she'd been right to stand up to them. That's when she made the decision that would change everything. "I'm going to sell the house," she announced the next morning over coffee. "Mom, no," I said, startled. "You don't have to do that. Don't let them pressure you into—" "I'm not," she interrupted. "I'm selling it because I want to. I'm tired of this house being a source of conflict. I'm tired of my children fighting over my inheritance while I'm still alive to see it." "But you love this house," I protested. "It's your home." "It was my home," she corrected sadly. "Now it's a battleground. I can't live peacefully here, knowing how much resentment it's causing." She'd made up her mind, and I could see there was no changing it. The stress of the family conflict was affecting her health, her happiness, her peace of mind. She'd rather give up the house than continue fighting about it. "Where will you go?" I asked. "I've been researching those senior communities Michael showed me," she said. "Some of them are actually quite nice. I found one about 20 minutes from here that has a garden club and a book club. I think I might be happy there." My heart broke for her. She was giving up her dream home because her own children couldn't see past their greed and resentment. But I also understood. She was 79 years old. She deserved peace in her final years, not constant conflict with her family. "What about me?" I asked. "I'll need to find a new place." "Actually," Mom said, with the first smile I'd seen from her since Thanksgiving, "I have an idea about that." Her idea was brilliant, and it would drive my siblings absolutely crazy. Instead of listing the house with a real estate agent, Mom decided to auction it. She said it would be faster, less complicated, and would ensure she got a fair market price. But the real reason, I suspected, was that it would be dramatic. One final statement that this was her house, her decision, her choice of how to handle it. She announced her decision at our next family gathering, a tense meeting at a restaurant because she refused to host them at the house anymore. "I've decided to auction the house," she said simply, cutting into her salmon like she hadn't just dropped a bomb. "Auction?" Michael nearly choked on his wine. "Mom, that's ridiculous. Auctions are for desperate sellers. You'll get far less than market value." "Actually," I said quietly, "estate auctions often get competitive bidding and exceed expected prices, especially for desirable properties in good neighborhoods." David glared at me. "Since when are you an expert on real estate auctions?" "Since I researched them," I replied. "I've been learning a lot about property law and real estate transactions lately. It's fascinating." That was true, but not for the reasons they thought. I'd been researching auctions because I'd already decided I was going to bid on the house myself. Mom didn't know yet. That would be my surprise. "This is insane," Jennifer said. "Mom, please reconsider. Let us help you list it properly with a good agent, get the maximum value." "I've made my decision," Mom said firmly. "The auction is set for next month. The house will be sold, I'll move to Sunset Manor, and hopefully this family can stop fighting about money and start acting like we actually love each other." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. They all looked appropriately chastened, but I could see the wheels turning. They were already calculating what the house might sell for, how much Mom would net after expenses, how that would eventually be divided among them. What they didn't calculate was that I might have my own plans. Over the next few weeks, I made my preparations. I met with my bank, arranged for a loan pre-approval that would cover the likely auction price. I researched the property thoroughly, had an independent inspection done, verified the title and tax status. I was going into this auction fully prepared, not as the naive little sister they thought I was, but as a serious bidder with serious intentions. I also made peace with my decision. This house meant everything to Mom, and through her, it had come to mean everything to me. It was where I'd finally found my place in the family, where I'd learned I could be strong and capable and needed. If I could save it, keep it in the family, maybe someday the rest of them would understand what they'd almost lost. But I didn't tell any of them about my plans. As far as they knew, I was job hunting and apartment hunting, preparing to start over somewhere new. They seemed relieved that I wasn't fighting the sale, that I was finally being realistic about the situation. "It's really for the best," Jennifer said when she called to check on me the week before the auction. "You'll be better off in your own place, building your own life instead of playing caretaker." "Maybe you're right," I agreed, letting her think she'd won. "And honestly," she continued, "this house would have been too much for you to inherit anyway. Can you imagine trying to maintain it on your salary?" I could imagine it just fine, since I'd been doing it for almost a year. But I just made agreeable noises and let her feel superior. The day of the auction arrived gray and drizzly, which seemed appropriate for such a dramatic ending to our family story. Mom had moved most of her belongings to storage or to her new apartment at Sunset Manor, leaving only the basic furniture for staging purposes. I arrived early, parked across the street where I could watch the proceedings. I was nervous, not about the money. I'd secured financing for well above the expected price, but about the emotional weight of what I was doing. If I succeeded, I'd own my childhood home. If I failed, I'd watch strangers take possession of 40 years of family memories. My siblings arrived together, which was unusual. They'd been getting along better since Mom announced the sale, united in their relief that the family conflict was finally being resolved. They stood together on the front lawn, looking like successful, responsible adults who'd made the hard but necessary decision to sell their aging mother's house. They had no idea what was about to happen. The auctioneer was a professional, efficient man who'd clearly done this many times before. He outlined the terms, described the property, and opened the bidding at a reasonable starting price. Several people raised their hands. A young couple looking for their first home, an older man who mentioned wanting to downsize to the neighborhood, a woman who said she was buying for her daughter. The bidding started slow but picked up quickly. This was a desirable neighborhood, and the house, despite my siblings' complaints, was actually in excellent condition. I'd made sure of that over the past year. I waited, watching the price climb, listening to the auctioneer's rhythmic call for higher bids. My siblings stood with their arms crossed, looking satisfied as the numbers went higher than they'd expected. At what point did it hit Rachel that something was wrong? Maybe when the bidding reached a level that should have eliminated most casual buyers, but new hands kept going up. Maybe when they noticed the auctioneer kept looking in the same direction, toward a bidder they couldn't quite see from their position. By the time the price hit $50,000 over the estimated value, they were looking around nervously, trying to identify who was driving the bidding so high. That's when I stepped forward and raised my hand. The look on Michael's face was priceless. Pure shock, followed quickly by confusion, then dawning horror as he realized what was happening. $65,000, I called out clearly, making sure they could all hear me. Jennifer grabbed David's arm. Is that Rachel? The other bidders were dropping out now. The price had gone higher than most people were comfortable with, but I wasn't most people. I'd lived in this house for a year. I knew exactly what it was worth, exactly what I was willing to pay to keep it. $70,000, called the older man who'd been my main competition. $75,000, I responded immediately. I could see my siblings trying to get closer, trying to catch my attention, but I kept my eyes on the auctioneer. This was business now, and I was good at business. The older man hesitated, then shook his head and stepped back. The auctioneer looked around for other bidders, found none, and began his closing call. $75,000, going once, going twice. He paused, scanning the crowd one final time. Sold to bidder number 47. That was me, bidder number 47. I walked forward to complete the paperwork, my hands surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what I'd just done. Behind me, I could hear my siblings' voices rising in confused, angry conversation. But I didn't turn around. Not yet. The auctioneer was efficient and professional, walking me through the deposit process, the closing timeline, the transfer of deed. I signed document after document, each signature making it more real. I was buying my childhood home. I was keeping it in the family, just not the way anyone had expected. Congratulations, the auctioneer said, shaking my hand. Beautiful property. You got a good deal, even at that price. Houses in this neighborhood have been appreciating steadily. I thanked him and turned to face my family. They were standing in a tight cluster near the driveway, their faces showing a mixture of shock, confusion, and growing anger. Other auction attendees were leaving, disappointed but polite. The young couple who'd been bidding early on stopped to congratulate me, saying they hoped I'd be happy in such a lovely home. I walked over to my siblings slowly, giving them time to process what had just happened. Rachel, Michael said, his voice tight with control. What the hell was that? That was me buying the house, I said simply. With what money? David demanded. You can't afford that. You don't have $75,000. Actually, I do, I replied calmly, plus the financing for the rest. I've been approved for a mortgage that covers the full purchase price. Jennifer was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. I don't understand. Why would you do this? You're going to be house poor, struggling to make payments on a place that's too big for you. Because it's my home, I said. Because I love it. Because I want to preserve it. Because someone in this family should care about more than just the money. This is insane, Michael said, running his hands through his hair. Rachel, you can't maintain this place on your own. What happens when major repairs are needed? What happens if you lose your job? The same thing that happens to any homeowner, I said. I'll figure it out. But why? Jennifer asked, and for the first time, she sounded more hurt than angry. Why would you do this without telling us? We're your family. That question hung in the air between us. Why hadn't I told them? Why had I let them believe I was accepting the sale, moving on, starting fresh somewhere else? Because you would have tried to stop me, I said honestly. Because you would have found 100 reasons why it was a bad idea, why I couldn't handle it, why I was being emotional and impractical. Because you've spent the last 2 years telling me I don't know anything about home ownership or financial responsibility. Because we were trying to protect you, David said. This is exactly the kind of mistake we were worried about. No, I said, my voice getting stronger. You were trying to control me, just like you tried to control Mom. You've spent so long thinking of me as the incompetent little sister that you couldn't see I'd grown up, that I'm capable of making my own decisions. The argument that followed was intense but brief. They accused me of being secretive, manipulative, financially reckless. I accused them of being condescending, controlling, and caring more about their inheritance than their family. It was everything we'd been building toward for 2 years, all the resentment and frustration finally coming to the surface. But here's the thing about arguments at auction sites. They have to end eventually because everyone else leaves. The auctioneer packed up his equipment, the other bidders drove away, and we were left standing in the driveway of what was now my house, saying things we couldn't take back. Fine, Michael said finally. You want to make this mistake? Make it. But don't come crying to us when you can't handle the reality of homeownership. And don't expect us to bail you out when this house becomes the financial disaster we predicted, David added. Jennifer just shook her head sadly. I hope you know what you're doing, Rachel. I really do. They left together, just as they'd arrived, united now in their certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. I stood alone in front of my house, watching their cars disappear down the street. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in months, I was alone with the house, with my decision, with the magnitude of what I'd just done. I sat down on the front steps, the same steps where I'd sat as a child waiting for Dad to come home from work, where I'd sat as a teenager talking on the phone with friends, where I'd sat just a year ago helping Mom plan her garden. I pulled out my phone and called Mom at Sunset Manor. Hello, sweetheart, she answered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. How did the auction go? I bought it, I said simply. There was a long pause. You bought what? The house, Mom. I bought the house. Another pause, longer this time. Then she started laughing, really laughing, the kind of delighted laughter I hadn't heard from her in years. You bought my house? She said between giggles. Oh, Rachel, that's wonderful. That's perfect. How are your siblings taking it? Not well, I admitted. I imagine not, she said, still chuckling. They probably think you've lost your mind. Have I? Oh, sweetheart, she said, and her voice was warm with love and pride. You've found it. You've finally found your backbone, your voice, your place in this family. I'm so proud of you. We talked for another hour, with me sitting on the front steps of my house, telling her about the auction, about my siblings' reaction, about my plans for the property. She told me about her new apartment, about the friends she was making, about how happy she was to know the house would stay in the family. Your father would be so pleased, she said toward the end of our conversation. He always said you were the steady one, the one with real substance. He'd love knowing you're the one taking care of his house. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like the family afterthought. The gradual realization that being underestimated was actually a form of freedom, freedom to observe, to plan, to act without interference. The discovery that quiet strength could be more powerful than loud demands. I thought about my siblings, probably at one of their houses right now, analyzing my decision, predicting my failure, comforting each other with the certainty that I'd bitten off more than I could chew. They were so invested in being right about me, so certain of my limitations, that they couldn't see what I'd actually accomplished. I'd just outbid seasoned buyers and investors for a piece of prime real estate. I'd secured financing for a major purchase. I'd made a strategic decision that preserved family history while positioning myself for long-term financial stability. These weren't the actions of an incompetent person. These were the actions of someone who'd been paying attention, learning, growing, while everyone else was busy talking. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into making the house truly mine. I'd been living there for a year, but always as Mom's guest, always with the understanding that it was temporary. Now it was permanent, and I could make changes, improvements, put down real roots. I updated the kitchen with energy-efficient appliances, refinished the hardwood floors, painted the bedrooms in colors I'd always loved. I planted a garden, fixed the squeaky stairs, installed a security system. Every project taught me something new about homeownership, about myself, about what I was capable of when I stopped listening to other people's doubts. The work was hard, expensive, and time-consuming. There were moments when I questioned my decision, when unexpected repairs or complicated projects made me wonder if my siblings had been right about this being too much for me. But those moments passed, and each challenge I overcame made me more confident in my choice. My siblings, meanwhile, maintained radio silence. No calls to check how I was doing, no visits to see the improvements I was making, no acknowledgement that maybe I was handling homeownership better than they'd predicted. Their silence spoke volumes about their investment in being right versus their investment in my well-being, but I wasn't entirely alone. Mom visited regularly, bringing friends from Sunset Manor to see the house, obviously proud of what I was accomplishing. Neighbors who remembered me from childhood stopped by to welcome me officially to the neighborhood. Old family friends reached out when they heard I'd bought the house, sharing memories of gatherings and celebrations that had taken place within these walls. The house was becoming mine in ways I hadn't expected. Not just legally, but emotionally, spiritually. I was creating new memories while honoring old ones, building a life that felt authentic and grounded in ways my apartment never had. 6 months after the auction, I decided to host a housewarming party. Not for my siblings, they'd made their feelings clear, but for the people who'd supported me, celebrated with me, believed in my decision. Mom and her new friends, my neighbors, co-workers who'd become genuine friends, contractors who'd become trusted advisors. It was a beautiful evening in early fall, perfect weather for an outdoor gathering. I set up tables in the backyard, strung lights between the trees, prepared food in the kitchen where Mom had taught me to cook. The house was full of laughter and conversation, exactly as it should be, exactly as it had been in the best times with my family. I was bringing out a fresh pitcher of sangria when I saw a familiar car pull up across the street. Michael's BMW, with David's sedan right behind it. My heart sank a little, not because I didn't want to see them, but because I knew their presence would change the energy of the evening. They stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, clearly debating whether to approach. I could see them through the front window, pointing at the house, at the party decorations, at the cars of my guests. Finally, Jennifer got out of David's car and started walking toward the front door. I met them on the front porch, sangria pitcher still in my hands. "Hi," Jennifer said awkwardly. We were driving by and saw the party. We thought maybe—" She trailed off, clearly uncertain of her welcome. "You thought maybe what?" I asked, not unkindly, but not enthusiastically either. Michael stepped forward. "We thought maybe it was time we saw what you've done with the place." I looked at the three of them, my siblings who'd spent months predicting my failure, who'd been so sure I'd made a terrible mistake. They looked uncomfortable, uncertain, maybe even a little embarrassed. "Are you here to gloat?" I asked. "To point out problems and tell me how I should have done things differently?" "No," David said quickly. "We're here because—" He paused, struggling with words. "Because we might have been wrong about some things." That was probably the closest to an apology I was going to get from him. I considered my options. I could turn them away, make them pay for months of doubt and dismissal. I could invite them in conditionally, with warnings about their behavior. Or I could take the high road and let them see for themselves what I'd accomplished. "The party's in the backyard," I said finally, stepping aside to let them in. "Try not to insult my guests." They followed me through the house, and I watched their faces as they took in the changes I'd made. The refinished floors gleamed in the warm light. The updated kitchen sparkled with new appliances and fresh paint. Everything was clean, well-maintained, obviously loved. "Rachel," Jennifer said softly, running her hand along the granite countertop I'd installed, "this is beautiful. You did all this yourself?" Michael asked, examining the crown molding I'd had professionally installed but personally selected. "Most of it," I said. "I hired professionals for the electrical work and plumbing, but I did the painting, the decorating, a lot of the smaller projects." We continued through the house, and their amazement grew with each room. The guest bedroom where Mom used to stay was now a home office with built-in shelves and a window seat. The basement had been converted into a cozy family room with a gas fireplace. The master bedroom had been updated with an ensuite bathroom and walk-in closet. "How did you afford all this?" David asked, and for once his tone wasn't accusatory, just genuinely curious. "Carefully," I said. "I budgeted for improvements over time, did a lot of the work myself, shopped for deals on materials. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not paying rent on an apartment you don't really want." We reached the backyard where my party was in full swing. Mom saw us coming and her face lit up with surprise and joy. "My other children," she called out, hurrying over to hug them. "I'm so glad you came." The next hour was awkward, but not hostile. My siblings mingled with my guests, saw the garden I'd planted, admired the deck I'd had built, listened to neighbors talk about what a wonderful addition I was to the community. Slowly, I could see their perspective shifting. This wasn't the financial disaster they'd predicted. This wasn't a young woman in over her head, struggling to maintain a property beyond her means. This was a successful homeowner who'd made thoughtful improvements, built community connections, and created a life that was obviously fulfilling. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, my siblings lingered. We ended up sitting on the deck with Mom, watching the sun set over the garden, the way we used to when we were kids. "I owe you an apology," Michael said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. We all turned to look at him, surprised by the admission. "I was wrong about you," he continued, looking directly at me. "I was wrong about your capabilities, wrong about this house, wrong about what was best for Mom. I let my own assumptions blind me to what was actually happening." "We all did," Jennifer added quietly. "We were so sure we knew better, so convinced you were making a mistake, that we couldn't see you'd already proven us wrong." David nodded. "You've done something remarkable here, Rachel. Not just with the house, but with your life. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." I felt tears starting to gather in my eyes. These were words I'd been waiting to hear for years, validation I'd stopped hoping for. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know. Can we—" Jennifer hesitated, then pressed on. "Can we start over? Try to be the family we should have been all along?" I looked at them, these siblings who'd dismissed me, doubted me, tried to control me. They were flawed, stubborn, sometimes selfish people. But they were also my family, and maybe finally they were ready to see me as an equal rather than a child who needed their guidance. "I'd like that," I said. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your father always said this house would bring the family together," she said with tears in her eyes. "It just took a little longer than he expected. Hey, if you're enjoying this story so far, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment with your city and country. I always wonder where these family tales are reaching." The months that followed weren't perfect. Rebuilding family relationships is harder than rebuilding houses, and there were still moments of tension, still old patterns of behavior that crept in. But slowly, gradually, things got better. Michael started calling regularly, not to check up on me or offer unsolicited advice, but just to talk. He told me about his business challenges, asked for my perspective on financial decisions, even consulted me before making a major investment. The little sister he'd once dismissed as financially naive had become someone whose opinion he valued. David began including me in family legal discussions, recognizing that I'd developed real expertise in property law and estate planning through my own experience. When other family members needed advice about real estate transactions or inheritance issues, he referred them to me as often as to himself. Jennifer and I developed a genuine friendship for the first time in our adult lives. She started visiting regularly, bringing her kids to play in the yard where we'd grown up, asking me to help with their homework the way I'd once helped with hers. She even admitted that she'd been jealous of my relationship with Mom, jealous that I'd found a way to be genuinely helpful while she'd felt useless. But the biggest change was in how they saw me. No longer the baby sister who needed protection and guidance, I was now the family member they turned to in a crisis. When Michael's business hit a rough patch, I helped him restructure his debt. When David's divorce got complicated, I offered him the guest room and emotional support. When Jennifer's daughter needed a safe place to stay during a family crisis, she came to Aunt Rachel's house. I'd become the stable center of our family, the one with the resources and the space and the emotional capacity to help when help was needed. It was a role I'd never expected, but found deeply satisfying. The house itself continued to be a source of joy and pride. I learned to love the rhythm of home ownership, the seasonal maintenance, the ongoing improvements, the way a house rewards care and attention with comfort and beauty. I became the neighbor who organized block parties, who had extra bedrooms for visiting friends, who could host holiday dinners and graduation celebrations. 2 years after the auction, I refinanced the mortgage at a lower interest rate, using the house's appreciated value to secure better terms. The property had gained nearly $30,000 in value since I'd bought it, vindicating my investment in ways my siblings couldn't ignore. "You know," Michael said one evening as we sat on the deck after a family barbecue, "you might be the smartest investor in the family." "Real estate has been good to me," I agreed, looking out over the garden that was now fully mature, lush and productive in ways it had never been when I was growing up. "It's not just the real estate," David said. "It's everything. You saw an opportunity when the rest of us saw a problem. You had the courage to act when we were paralyzed by fear. You turned what we thought was a burden into an asset. You also saved Mom from making a decision she would have regretted," Jennifer added. "She's happy at Sunset Manor, but she would have been heartbroken to see this house go to strangers." That was true. Mom visited every week, bringing friends to see her former home, obviously proud of what I'd accomplished. She'd found a good life at the senior community, but knowing her house was still in the family, still loved and cared for, had given her a peace she wouldn't have had otherwise. "I had advantages you didn't," I said, "because fairness mattered to me. I was living here, I understood the real costs and challenges, I had the flexibility of being single, no kids to consider, and I was lucky. Lucky that the market stayed strong, lucky that I stayed healthy and employed, lucky that major repairs didn't hit all at once." "Luck favors the prepared," Mom said, joining our conversation with a glass of lemonade. "You weren't just lucky, sweetheart. You were smart, careful, and brave." As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, I found myself alone with Mom for a few minutes. "Are you happy with how things turned out?" I asked her. She looked around the backyard, at the deck where her children and grandchildren had spent the evening, at the house where she'd raised her family, at the garden where she'd taught me to plant tomatoes. "This is exactly what your father and I dreamed of when we built this house," she said. "Family gatherings, children playing in the yard, someone who loves this place taking care of it. We just never imagined it would be you doing the caretaking." "Why not me?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because you were always so independent," she said. "Even as a little girl, you never seemed to need us the way the others did. We thought you'd want to build your own life somewhere else, make your own mark on the world." "Maybe this is my mark," I said, looking at the house that was now indisputably mine. Maybe home was always what I was looking for. 3 years after the auction, I hosted my first Christmas dinner as the official head of the family. It was a role that had evolved naturally. I had the space, the time, the inclination to coordinate family gatherings. My siblings had busy lives with spouses and children and careers that demanded travel. I had a house that was perfect for entertaining and a genuine love for bringing people together. The Christmas dinner was magical. 3 generations gathered around the dining room table that had seen decades of family meals. Grandchildren played with toys under the same tree where we'd opened presents as kids. The kitchen bustled with the preparation of traditional recipes handed down from Mom and Grandma. But the best moment came late in the evening, after the dishes were done and the kids were sleepy, when Michael pulled me aside. "I have something to tell you," he said, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Should I be worried?" I asked. "No," he smiled. "The opposite, actually. I've been thinking about what Dad would say if he could see us all here tonight. See what you've done with this place. See how our family has come back together." "And what do you think he'd say?" "I think he'd say you turned out exactly the way he hoped," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "You became the heart of this family, not because you're the loudest or the most successful or the one with the most money, but because you're the one who cares the most about keeping us connected." I felt tears start to gather, the way they always did when someone acknowledged not just what I'd accomplished, but who I'd become in the process. "You know what the best part is?" he continued. "You proved us all wrong, but you didn't hold grudges. You could have shut us out, made us pay for doubting you. Instead, you kept the door open, gave us a chance to see our mistakes and do better." "Family forgives," I said simply. "That's what families do." "Not all families," he replied, "but ours does, thanks to you." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was alone in my house, I walked through the rooms thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The quiet little sister who'd bought her childhood home had become the matriarch of her family, the one who hosted celebrations and provided refuge, who offered advice and emotional support. I thought about the auction day, standing in the rain, watching my siblings predict my failure while I prepared to prove them wrong. I thought about the months of work, the steep learning curve of home ownership, the satisfaction of each completed project. I thought about the gradual rebuilding of family relationships, the slow recognition that I'd grown into someone worth respecting. Most of all, I thought about the vindication of believing in myself when no one else did, of trusting my own judgment over their doubts, of taking the risk they said I couldn't handle and turning it into the foundation of a life I loved. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds of a home that had sheltered generations of my family and would, with any luck, shelter generations more. I'd saved it from being sold to strangers, but more than that, I'd saved it for the future. For nieces and nephews who might want to come home someday. For gatherings and celebrations that hadn't happened yet. For the continuation of a family story that could have ended with an auction gavel, but instead got a new chapter. They thought I wouldn't even show up to the auction. They were wrong about that, just like they were wrong about everything else. I didn't just show up. I changed the entire story. I took control of my own narrative, and in doing so, gave my family a different ending than anyone had imagined. And when it came time to celebrate that victory, to mark the moment when the quiet sister became the one in charge, I didn't invite them to the party. Not because I was petty or vindictive, but because some victories are meant to be savored alone first, in the silence of a house that finally, truly, completely belongs to you. The keys in my hand weren't just keys to a house. They were keys to a new version of myself, a woman who'd learned that being underestimated was the greatest gift her family could have given her. Because while they were busy doubting what I could do, I was busy doing it. And now, sitting in my living room on Christmas night, surrounded by the warmth and memories of a house that chose me as much as I chose it, I can honestly say that buying this house was the best decision I ever made. Not just financially, though it's been a solid investment. Not just practically, though it's given me stability and security I never had as a renter. The best decision because it forced me to bet on myself, to trust my own judgment, to stop living down to other people's expectations and start living up to my own potential. They thought I wouldn't go to the auction, but I did. They thought I couldn't handle home ownership, but I could. They thought I'd made a terrible mistake, but I'd actually made the move that would define the rest of my life. Sometimes the biggest risk is the one that doesn't feel like a risk at all. Sometimes the smartest investment is the one everyone else thinks is foolish. And sometimes the family member who gets overlooked is the one who's been paying attention all along, waiting for the moment when their quiet strength becomes the thing that saves everything that matters. The auction was just the beginning. What came after? The work, the growth, the gradual recognition, the rebuilding of relationships on equal terms, that was the real victory. That was worth every dollar I spent, every doubt I ignored, every prediction I proved wrong. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope it inspires you to trust your own judgment, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. Especially then. Because sometimes the craziest thing you can do is exactly the thing that makes perfect sense for your life. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever been the underestimated one in your family, if you've ever had to choose between playing it safe and following your heart, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you surprised everyone, including yourself, with what you were capable of. And remember, they might think you won't show up, but you know better. You know what you're made of. Trust that knowledge, bet on yourself, and don't invite them to the celebration. Some victories are worth savoring in private first.